My neighbor drives a $70,000 BMW. Parks it right in front of his house every night like it's a monument to success. Guy wears a Rolex, takes his family to Aspen twice a year, posts about it constantly on social media. Here's what I know that you don't. He makes less than I do. I've seen his tax returns. We use the same accountant. The difference between us? I drive a 2011 Honda Accord with 16,000 miles on it, and I have $1.2 million invested. He has $17,000 in his 401k and about $250,000 in debt when you include the mortgage, car loans, and credit cards. We're both 47 years old. In 8 years, I'm going to retire. In 8 years, he's going to still be working. Probably harder than he is now, trying to maintain an image that was never real to begin with. So here's the punchline question. Which one of us is actually wealthy? I'm going to explain exactly how the psychology of looking poor creates actual wealth. This is about understanding a tax that nobody talks about. I call it the wealth visibility tax, and it's probably the most expensive tax you'll ever pay. Think of wealth like an iceberg. What's visible above the waterline is what everyone sees. What's invisible below the waterline is the actual wealth. The investment accounts, the dividend income, the compounding returns, the financial optionality. This isn't a metaphor. This is math. Every single dollar you spend signaling wealth is a dollar you didn't invest. And because of compound growth, that dollar would have become multiple dollars. Let me tell you about my business partner from 2008 to 2115. Smart guy, made good money, started making about $200,000 a year by 21. First thing he did, moved from his perfectly fine townhouse into a 4-bedroom house in a fancy neighborhood. Monthly housing cost went from $2,000 to $4,500. I asked him once why he did it. He said, and I quote, "You have to look successful to be successful. People need to see you've made it." That phrase, people need to see. That's the trap. The extra $2,800 a month in housing, the car payments, the country club dues, all of it. Let's just say he was spending an extra $4,000 a month on status signaling. That's $48,000 a year. Over 5 years, $240,000. If he'd invested that in the S&P 500 starting in 2011, you know what that would be worth today? About $700,000. He didn't buy a lifestyle. He sold his future. But you might be thinking, doesn't looking successful actually help you make more money? Doesn't it help you close deals, get promotions, build credibility? And look, to be fair, in certain businesses, yes. If you're a wealth manager pitching high net worth clients, showing up in an IKEA outfit is probably not optimal. But here's the problem. That's like 2% of jobs. For 98% of people, including most business owners, the ROI on looking wealthy is either 0 or negative. There's a story about Warren Buffett. Guy's worth about $130 billion right now. Lives in the same house he bought in 1958 for $31,000 in Omaha. But they missed the point entirely. Buffett understands something that most people spend their entire lives not understanding. Looking wealthy is a negatively compounding behavior. Every dollar you spend on it costs you multiple future dollars, and it trains your brain to value the wrong things. It's not that Buffett is cheap. The man has given away tens of billions to charity. When you spend money on status, you're not just losing the money and the investment returns you would have gotten. You're training your brain to associate spending with success. You're creating a psychological pattern where your self-worth becomes tied to external validation. And that pattern is incredibly hard to break. It's like an addiction, except society encourages it. There's no intervention for buying too nice of a car. There's no rehab for lifestyle creep. In fact, it's the opposite. The entire American economy is designed to make you think that upgrading is normal. Let me give you a specific example. A guy I know made partner at his firm in 2019. Big raise. Went from making $220,000. When you factor inflation and the cost of living increases, it might not be as big a jump as it seems. Within 6 months, he'd increased his lifestyle spending by about $6,000 a month, $72,000 a year. Out of a $90,000 raise, he only increased his savings by $18,000. The rest disappeared into lifestyle. Now you might say, well, he still increased his savings. That's good, right? Wrong. Because here's what nobody tells you. When you lock in lifestyle inflation, you don't just lose that money now. You lose the optionality forever. He now needs to maintain a $310,000 income just to keep living his life. He can't take a sabbatical. He can't start a business. He can't retire early. He's trapped. And if his income ever decreases, he's got to make painful cuts to things he now considers normal. That's the ratchet effect. Lifestyle goes up easily. It almost never comes down without serious psychological pain. This is where it gets really interesting. The wealth visibility tax has a second-order effect that most people never consider. It changes who you spend time with. Here's how it works. You buy the nice house in the nice neighborhood. Now you're surrounded by people who also bought nice houses. Your kids become friends with their kids. You start socializing with them. And now suddenly you're in an environment where everyone is spending to signal status. The other parents drive nice cars, they take nice vacations, they send their kids to expensive camps. And if you don't keep up, your kid is the one who didn't go to Costa Rica over spring break. Your family is the one that looks like they're struggling. So you spend more to fit in. Which puts you around more people who spend more. It's a doom loop. Your peer group becomes a financial anchor, dragging you down by making you normalize spending patterns that are objectively insane. I saw this firsthand when my wife and I were deciding where to live in 21-2. We were looking at houses in two neighborhoods. One was more expensive, better schools on paper, bigger houses. One was less expensive, still good schools, smaller houses. I ran the numbers. The more expensive neighborhood would cost us an extra $2,000 a month. Over 30 years with investment returns. That's about $2.4 million. But here's what really made the decision for me. I drove through the expensive neighborhood and looked at the driveways. BMWs, Mercedes, Range Rovers everywhere. Then I drove through the cheaper neighborhood. Hondas, Toyotas, some Fords. I realized if we moved to the expensive neighborhood, we'd be surrounded by people. We chose the cheaper neighborhood. Best financial decision we ever made. Not because the house was cheaper, because the peer group was sanner. Now you're asking yourself, okay, but isn't there some level of spending that's reasonable? Some baseline standard of living that you should have if you can afford it? And look, yes, obviously. Let me give you a framework. Split your purchases into 3 categories: utility, comfort, and status. Utility is the baseline function. A car that gets you to work. Comfort is the incremental improvement that actually improves your quality of life. A car that's reliable, safe, has air conditioning. Status is everything beyond that. The badge, the brand, the signal. Here's the rule: pay for utility. Pay for comfort if the marginal improvement is worth it to you personally. Never pay for status. Never. Let me show you what this looks like in practice with actual numbers. 2 guys, both 45 years old, both making $200,000 a year gross, both living in a medium cost of living city. Let's call them Alex and Brian. After taxes, they're both taking home about $130,000. Alex follows the conventional wisdom. He buys a nice house, $350,000. Puts 10% down, mortgages the rest. Payment with insurance and tax is about $2,700 a month. He drives a $50,000 SUV, finances it, pays $600 a month. He takes his family on nice vacations, spends about $8,000 a year. He's got lifestyle expenses, clothes, restaurants, entertainment that run about $3,000 a month. Total annual spending is about $90,000. He saves the other $40,000 in his 401k. Brian does it differently. He buys a house for $250,000. Same down payment, but his monthly payment is about $1,900. He drives a $15,000 used Toyota, paid cash, no payment. He takes cheaper vacations, spends about $3,000 a year. His lifestyle expenses are about $1,800 a month. Total annual spending is about $55,000. He saves $85,000 a year, split between his 401k and a taxable brokerage account. Let's project this out 20 years. Both of them are investing in the S&P 500. Historically, that's averaged about 10% annual returns. Alex, saving $40,000 a year for 20 years at 10%, ends up with about $2.3 million. Not bad. Brian, saving $85,000 a year for 20 years at 10%, ends up with about $4.9 million. More than double. Both of them had the exact same income. The only difference was how visible they made their wealth. Alex paid the wealth visibility tax. Brian didn't. And that tax cost Alex about $2.6 million. Now think about what that means in practical terms. Alex has to work longer, save more aggressively later in life, take more risks to catch up. Brian can retire at 65 or 60 or 55 if he wants. He has optionality. He has freedom. Alex has a nicer car. But here's the kicker, and this is the part that really gets me. Most people look at Alex and think he's doing better than Brian. He gets the dopamine hit of people thinking he's made it. And that feeling, that temporary neurochemical reward, is what he traded for his future. That's the deal. You can have the appearance of success now, or you can have actual financial security later. For most people, the choice is obvious. They pick the appearance. I want to tell you about a guy I met at a conference in 2115. This was in Austin. He was probably 50 years old, wearing a suit that probably cost $2,000. Talking adront hifsteria estims, hifix arentel podgrings heviskult filio arning exements of Dubai escape, picking up dil tive a table of papelas he gus memet, pas ic saloning behavior. We ended up talking one-on-one later that night. And after a few drinks, the truth came out. He was leveraged to his eyeballs. His primary residence had a massive mortgage. He'd taken out a home equity line of credit to fund some of his investments. He was making good income, probably $400,000 a year, but his expenses were so high and his debt service was so expensive that he told me, and I remember this exactly, I feel like I'm one bad year away from losing everything. This is a guy who looked incredibly successful, and he was terrified because he'd built a house of cards and he knew it. The appearance of wealth had become a prison. Compare that to another guy I know who owns a small manufacturing business, makes probably about $600,000 a year, drives a 2140 Ford F-15, lives in a house he bought for $290. 15 years ago, wears jeans and work boots every day. You'd see him at a gas station and think he's a construction foreman. He's worth about $8 million. No debt, multiple income streams. Could stop working tomorrow and maintain his lifestyle forever. When I asked him once why he lives the way he does, he said something I think about constantly. I figured out that the less I spent on looking successful, the more successful I could actually become. And once I became actually successful, I realized I didn't need to look it. And look, I get it. That's a reasonable emotional response, but it's based on a false premise. The premise is that spending money on status makes you happy, and the research on this is pretty clear. It doesn't. There's a concept in psychology called the hedonic treadmill. Basically, humans adapt to new circumstances very quickly. Then it becomes your new normal and you're back to your baseline. The car didn't make you happier long term. It just gave you a temporary dopamine spike. Meanwhile, financial security, which you're sacrificing, actually does correlate with long-term life satisfaction. Not because having money makes you happy, but because not having financial stress makes you less unhappy. There's a difference. Here's what actually makes people happy according to pretty much every long-term study on life satisfaction. Good relationships, good health, a sense of purpose, autonomy. That's it. You know what's not on the list? A nice car, a big house, designer clothes, expensive vacations. Now, some of those things might be correlated with happiness if they enable the things that do matter. Like, if you have a nice house that allows you to host family dinners and build relationships, great. But if you have a nice house that comes with a massive mortgage that forces you to work 70 hours a week and never see your family, you've made a catastrophically bad trade. Let me give you the most depressing statistic I've seen in the last 5 years. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, the median retirement account balance for Americans aged 55 to 64 is about $134,000. That's median, meaning half of people have less than that. You know what that generates in annual income using the 4% rule? About $53.60 per year. That's it. After working for 40 years, half of Americans approaching retirement have saved enough to generate about $445 per month. And you know why? Because they spent their working years paying the wealth visibility tax. They bought the cars, the houses, the vacations, the stuff, and now they're broke. Meanwhile, there's this tiny percentage of people who figured out the game early. They kept their expenses low, invested aggressively, let compounding do its thing, and now they're sitting on millions of dollars that nobody knows about. They're the invisible wealthy, and they stay invisible on purpose because they understand that the moment you become visible, the wealth visibility tax finds you. Your family starts asking for money. Your friends expect you to pick up tabs. Salespeople see you as a mark. Leased out creep becomes inevitable. Staying invisible is the only way to stay wealthy. There's a book called The Millionaire Next Door, written in 1996 by Thomas Stanley and William Danko. They studied thousands of millionaires and found something shocking. The majority of them were indistinguishable from middle-class Americans. They drove domestic cars, lived in middle-class neighborhoods, bought off-brand products, shopped at discount stores. The profile of the average millionaire was the opposite of what popular culture told us. They weren't flashy entrepreneurs or celebrities. They were small business owners, engineers, accountants, teachers, who lived below their means and invested the difference for 30 years. The researchers found that there was actually a negative correlation between looking wealthy and being wealthy. The people who looked rich usually weren't. The people who were rich usually didn't look it. Now here's the really interesting part. This research was done in the 90s. It's gotten worse since then. You see people taking trips to Bali, staying in overwater bungalows, eating at expensive restaurants, wearing designer clothes, and your brain interprets that as normal, as what successful people do, or they're social media influencers who are literally getting paid to look wealthy. You just see the output and think, I should be doing that too. And then you do, and then you're broke. I'm going to tell you something that sounds harsh, but is objectively true based on every piece of financial data we have. What 99% of people do is usually what not to do. The average person has almost no retirement savings. The average person finances depreciating assets. The average person has consumer debt. The average person is one emergency away from financial crisis. And the average person spends significant money on status signaling. That's the majority. That's the herd. And if you do what the herd does, you get herd results, which are bad. If you want different results, you have to do the opposite of the herd. And the opposite of the herd is looking poor while building wealth invisibly. So here are 3 specific tactical takeaways. First, implement what I call the 10-year test. Before you make any significant purchase, especially anything related to status, cars, houses, watches, whatever, calculate what that money would be worth. If you invested it for 10 years instead, use a compound interest calculator, assume 8 to 10% returns, look at that number. That's what you're actually paying, not the sticker price. The opportunity cost. Most of the time, when you see that a $60,000 car would become about $130,000 in investment value over 10 years, the decision becomes obvious. Second, systematically downshift your peer group. This sounds terrible, but it works. If you're surrounded by people who spend irresponsibly, you will spend irresponsibly. It's not a willpower thing, it's a social conformity thing. Humans are wired to match their behavior to their peer group. Find people who have the financial values you want to have. Join communities, online or offline, where people talk about financial independence, early retirement, investing. Distance yourself from people whose entire identity is wrapped up in consumption. Set up automatic transfers from your paycheck to investment accounts before you even see the money. Make it so you never have the option to spend it. Most people try to save what's left over after spending. That's backwards. Spend what's left over after saving. Pay yourself first, as the cliche goes, but actually do it. I have my paycheck set up so that 40% disappears into investment accounts. Before it hits my checking account, I never see it, so I never miss it. And I never feel like I'm depriving myself because I'm living on what actually shows up, not on what I theoretically could spend. The entire game is psychological. Looking poor isn't about deprivation. It's about understanding that status is a trap, that signaling wealth prevents you from building it. And in 20 years, you'll have optionality they can't even imagine. They'll still be making car payments.